In 1968, something besides the assembly line pop of Motown and assembly line cars was happening in Detroit, USA. It was a rock and roll war, and Detroit's most committed soldiers were the MC5 and the Stooges.
Brothers and sisters, I want to see your hands out there. Let me see your hands. I want everybody to kick up some noise. I want to hear some revolution out there, brothers. I want to hear a little revolution. Are you ready? I give you a testimonial. The MC5. Love is like a rambling rose. The more it feel it, the more it grows. Rambling rose, rambling rose. Hey. Rambling rose, I'm such a boy. Diamond rings and a Cadillac car. Rambling rose, rambling rose.
Dennis Thompson of the Motor City 5.
Those days you had civil rights, you had sexual revolution, you had the drug movement, you had the female liberation movement, you had riots, you had the war in Vietnam. You had too much happening at one time. Stooges and the Five were bands that fronted the assault for the people that stood up for the alternative way of thinking at that period of time, which was anti-war, pro-change, pro-growth. And needless to say, we met with a lot of resistance because of that. Resistance with the law, resistance within our own community, our own age groups, our own peers. But we knew all along that what we were doing was righteous and was correct, felt good, and the people really responded to it in a very positive way, so we carried on. And we went through, both of our bands went through a lot of trauma to pull off what we pulled off.
Ron Ashton, the Stooges.
Went through basic growing pains, ripped off by this person, this management, this and that, worked their way through. The guys were banned into all kind of drug bullshit and what. And now you see what's left. You know, you've got Iggy who's doing all right for himself. I'm here. 2 guys who are dead, 2 guys who play bass are dead. Other guys.
It was now 1974 and a different battleground, Sydney, Australia. But the same rock and roll war was being fought by radio Birdmen. Ron Keeley, Warwick Gilbert, Chris Mazuick, Pip Hoyle, guitarist Dennis Tech, and singer Rob Younger. Tech, a medical student, had grown up in Detroit, had been inspired by the MC5 and the Stooges. Younger and the others were amongst the very few in Australia who discovered the music. But as Chris Mazuick recalled, Birdman's influences were always Detroit plus.
The Dolls and the Stooges, and MC5 and the Blue Oyster Cult, and Garland Jeffries and Jan and Dean, any number of things. And also the new thing at the time was really obscure 60s psychedelia.
In the early days, Radio Birdman used to open their shows with Walk Don't Run, a version inspired by the Pink Fairies from England. The band would play anywhere they could set up, but invitations were few and far between. Mostly a small room, eventually called the Oxford Funhouse, and a handful of private parties. But the select number of people who knew and followed Radio Birdman truly believed they were very special, even the best band in the world.
These bloody people had lampshades and shelves with books on them and all that sort of stuff laying around in the little room they were playing in. There's Rob Younger crawling along the floor and Dennis Tech jumping on him. And it wasn't they had no respect for what was in their house, it's just they didn't even know it existed. And I was cringing, thinking, what are they going to do? And all of a sudden, I saw the light as well.
walking out of the funhouse used to be extraordinary because you'd walk out and you'd just be electric. I mean, you'd sort of, your ears would be ringing, you'd be sort of quite numb but floating at the same time. You're walking down Oxford Street. I mean, you often used to walk all the way home simply because you couldn't stop. It's just a wonderful feeling and an incredible calm too. I mean, it was, yeah, funhouse was good.
Kind of elation, a sense of euphoria, and this feeling where I could get up in front of the speakers and close enough for the music to be so loud that it made me feel kind of non-physical. And I thought it was a bit like meditating.
When the funhouse was first taken over, they'd get maybe 100 people by then, but by the time it closed down 5.5 months later, they were getting about 400, which was more than capacity, you know. That was just jam-packed and people had to stand on tables and chairs and stuff, you know, just because there was no room. And people would be packed up the stairs and couldn't get in.
If you got too hot, which you always did, you had to wring your shirt out. You climb out the window and stand on the awning above Taylor Square.
most remarkable thing about the Funhouse that I can remember is that, and even though it only held, 300 people at the very most, it retained that urgency, that sense of everyone there having a good time, everyone there really, fighting for themselves.
Now, it was 1977, and Radio Birdman were being hailed by many as the only true rock and roll band in Australia. Others claimed they were fascist and ultra-negative, messy, heavy metal. Very few bands have polarized opinion between extreme love and loathing. The effect upon the band was to form a closed circle consisting of themselves and a few close friends.
We all felt a very strong comradeship, and we didn't really seem to try to figure out what it was all about. We didn't. Well, we weren't actively trying to change anything. All that we ever did was have a single goal in mind, and that was to be Radio Birdman. And if that took refusing to comply with, the restrictions that were imposed on other bands, and if it meant that we were divorced from everything else, well, that was too bad for everyone.
The first no holds barred band, where they'd play what they wanted. They didn't tone down for anyone. If they were asked to tone it down, they wouldn't do it. And that was it. They played it for their audience. If the audience was 5 people, they still played it as if it was for 100 people.
Driving out to Detroit Metro, snow traveling on the wind. The sky was gray and white, the road was to the end. Ice was flying through my eyes, my heart was cold as sin. Look, use your time.
Radio Birdman did not tour as such. They blitzkrieged. Their record producer, Charles Fisher, was involved in the planning.
I mean, the blitzkriegs were almost forced on us. I mean, in those days, we just couldn't get work. We couldn't go through the straight agencies. We couldn't go into the straight venues. Nobody wanted to know. As a result, we had to go directly to venues, find venues that would take us. Because Dennis was still at university, we could only play very pre-planned periods of time. And we condensed, like, literally a few months' exposure down to about 10 days. That's how they came up with the term blitzkrieg.
But the blitzkriegs also gave Birdman's critics an excuse to hang the band with a fascist tag.
And the fascist overtones came about because we had a symbol, we had something of a uniform that we wore.
Yeah, Dennis talked about that in his interview. He said this, he was talking about accusations of Nazism, and he said this woman just rushed on stage and tore the flag down and was screaming at the top of her lungs something about the Jews, and he couldn't believe it. Yeah, he said she was quite unreal.
A lot of people used to think they were fascists because of that flag and because of the uniforms they had, which people had thought bore a similarity to SS uniforms. I mean, they were not at all fascists, nowhere in the world. They got accused of that so many damn times. They didn't want other people to go and dress like them or look like them or anything. I mean, it was just unity. It was we are one.
The band tended toward fascism. I don't agree with that. The reactions to that really stunned them. They didn't expect to be taken as Nazis. They definitely wanted to shock.
While controversy raged around the band in Australia, the Birdman phenomenon was attracting international attention and an offer from Sire Records in America.
Well, the deal with Sire kind of just came out of the blue. It wasn't anything we chased. We had a record out, we had an album out which we were distributing independently, again because we tried through the majors and we couldn't get a distribution deal on it. Seymour Stein came to Australia to sign up the Saints, who had a lot of rave reviews for Stranded through the English press. He went down to an Oxford Tavern gig. He danced on the tables. He just loved everything. He followed the band around for 2 or 3 shows and came up and just offered the deal for us.
But even as Radio Birdman geared up to take on the world, Dennis Tech's commitment to his medical studies was closing in on the band's future.
As it became more successful, the other guys were totally interested in the musical side, which to him was secondary to his medicine. And obviously the pressure of, if I leave the band, there's no European tour, there's no nothing. It was almost like, well, I've got to continue for the sake of the others.
Dennis appeared to be a man with 2 types of personalities. One was a university persona, which is very serious and studious, and the other was a form of bad craziness persona, and they'd often overlap. So it was quite hard to tell what he was like most of the times.
Radio Birdman left for England in early 1978. They recorded an album at Rockfield Studios in Wales, then toured England and Europe with the Flaming Groovies. Then it was time for Dennis Tech to resume medicine. Tension within the band had reached a peak and Birdman broke up. While the album, later to be called Living Eyes, sat in the vaults till 1981, Warwick Gilbert and Chris Mazurek formed the Hitmen. Dennis Tech launched several one-off and occasional bands. Rob Younger formed The Other Side. But none could escape their Radio Birdman fame and reputation. Birdman fans and hordes of newcomers saw the new bands, but most, it seemed, were hoping for a replay of the band they loved the best. Meanwhile, an onslaught of hard rock bands, Rose Tattoo, The Angels, Cold Chisel, and Midnight Oil among them, was starting to defy pop charts and pack halls with excitable crowds. John Brewster, Angels guitarist.
I think in some ways Birdman probably had something to do with that. The Angels may have taken over from that. Probably pulled a lot of Radio Birdman people. I don't know. But we certainly, in our own way, got the same kind of intensity. They were probably the true cult band. Yeah. What looked like a cult thing with the Angels was on a far bigger proportion.
You're digging a mountain and looking for gold. You worship a cow like days of old. You're rising high in a public eye. 6 feet of dirt cut you to size. Who rings the bell? Who rings the bell? 2, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And then, in early 1981, 3 years after Radio Birdman had disbanded, Dennis Tech asked Rob Younger and Warwick Gilbert if they were available for a short Australian tour, with Dennis Thompson, ex-MC5, and Ron Ashton, ex-Stooges.
I met Dennis Tech about 5 years ago at one of my brother's band. He was playing in the Arbor, and saw this guy dancing, and he was great as he was. So he came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Dennis Tech. I've been a fan of your music for a long time." He seemed like a nice guy, so we exchanged numbers and what. He called me back a couple days later. We got together and went out and had drinks, started talking. So just every time he came back from Australia, he picked me up. We exchanged different contacts and what. So it's just I met him in a bar. I met Dennis through Ron, and we jammed together a few times. But we said that one day in the future we would get together and play. And hey, lo and behold, we get the call. So come on down. How about a little quickie tour of Australia?
The Five became the new Race, and thousands upon thousands more than had ever seen Radio Birdman packed out every pub and hall the band played.
Because of the whole Radio Birdman thing, and probably a lot of kids at 18, 19 and 20 now who were too young to get into Birdman, but had heard all about it, the curiosity was there, and they just came everywhere to see the new Race. They came to see a hard-hitting, loud, controversial rock and roll band, and that's what they saw.
The new Race, a legend. They came on as a legend. Word of mouth. That's all it was. Nothing else. It wasn't always just the band, it was the audience, and it was the people around. It was the reactions of the people watching the band play, and it was never the band up here and us there. It was like everyone, and it was tight. And nothing else around had anything to do with us. And I think that's why the Radio Birdman vibe did come out when I saw the new Race. And I was bloody happy to see people who'd only heard about them cheering.
It was more a good time thing. There's something really desperate about it. A lot of Radio Birdman gigs that wasn't there with New Race.
Dennis Thompson of the new Race.
But this band's approach is not a negative approach at all. There's no politics involved, there's no religion involved, there's no cult, you know, hipness and ego and that sort of thing involved. It's just pure full-bore, red line, enthusiasm, fun.
The new race was a temporary entity. It existed for 6 weeks, drew 12,000 people, and played 14 gigs. What remains is a live album, a new legend, and regret that this band, like Radio Birdman, the MC5, and the Stooges before them, broke up while there are still so many people who wanted to see these rock and roll soldiers keep fighting and win.
It's too bad. It's too bad this band's got to break up. That's the best way to write it, just too bad. Underlines and exclamation points, capital letters.
Rock and Roll Soldiers featured the voices and reminiscences of Radio Birdman friends and past associates. They included Jules Normington, Paul Gearside, Vivian and Tim Johnston, Felicity Surtees, Charles Fisher, Michael McMartin, and Steve Copeland, plus special guest appearances by Dennis Thompson, Ron Ashton, Chris Mazowick, and John Brewster.